So this is the third use case example that I wanted to share with you all. This use case is about determining and identifying growth opportunities for a category of business that may today be quite small or at least considered niche in the industry. So for this example, I'm going to use the example of kombucha, certainly a growing marketplace of fermented beverages. Kombucha seems to be increasingly pervasive throughout the retail environment. But certainly, when you compare it in the grand scheme of things to other non-alcoholic beverages, it is certainly a very small piece of the pie. So if I was, either choosing to carry kombucha as a retailer or quite simply a manufacturer of kombucha and trying to figure out how do I grow that side of the business, here's a quick way I could use MotivBase and come to some interesting outcomes. So I'm going to start with the main search here for the term kombucha itself. We'll let MotivBase crunch the numbers down and give us a sense of really what's driving consumer motivations and attitudes around kombucha. Okay, so one of the first things you see with kombucha itself, and I've just done a search here for 2017 data, the addressable market and the core market are quite small, just a 19 million addressable market, 1.7 million core market. It is still very much in the early adopter phase of the adoption curve, so it's still, early in its life cycle and maturity. So, one of the key questions that we might have in a situation like this is figuring out, what is the best way for us to, potentially grow this category, or rather, is there a way for us to grow this category? So one of the things I would recommend doing in a situation like this is a couple of things actually. The first thing we have to realize is that these results are really driven by the dominant motivations, attitudes, fears, and values that are really driving the consumer to care today about kombucha. If we have to grow the market, we have to change or alter the motivations and attitudes that are responsible for driving kombucha in the marketplace. So for us to figure out what is the right combination or what are some of the motivations or the attitudes or fears that we need to solve for and associate with our brand of kombucha or with the category as a whole in order to grow it, what we really need to do is figure out how the motivations and attitudes and these factors that drive the adoption of kombucha, how do they differ from a slightly different but related type of beverage? Why related? Because it shows us that if the consumer has a relationship between kombucha and a different type of beverage, then it shows us that there is a natural pathway to growing kombucha as a category. We just need to figure out, what kinds of motivations and attitudes and fears and values we need to be focusing on in order to do that. So the first task we have here is to really figure out how do we find a related category or related type of beverage to kombucha. So one of the things you'll see here is one of the top relationships is coconut water. So that's one related topic. Now, what I would do is just scroll down here and see if you can find a slightly more mainstream related beverage. What we'll do is run a search against that. There we go. Actually, sparkling water is a great example of that, or even carbonated water. But I'm going to try sparkling water here. So that's an example of a related category or a subcategory of beverages that is a little bit more mainstream for sure. We know that. But because it lies in the list of these relationships, clearly the consumer is making an association, even though it might be a few degrees away, between kombucha and sparkling water. So what we really want to understand now is, how do the motivations and values and factors that affect the adoption of sparkling water, how do they differ? And how much bigger is sparkling water compared to kombucha? And, potentially can we learn something from examining sparkling water? So that's really what I'm going to do here. So what I'm going to do is press this plus sign on the top and add a workspace. And this time I'm going to run a search for sparkling water. If I can spell. Sparkling. There we go. Sparkling water. I'm going to hit apply. and let it compute. As the results come in, I want to show you a couple more tricks here. What I'll do is I'll rename the workspace. So I'm just going to click on that, and you get a rename option. I'll call this sparkling water so that it's clear. And I'll go back to the kombucha workspace and rename that as well now. And then let's come back to sparkling water and examine that. One of the first things you'll notice is that obviously way more mature. It's in the early majority stages. Its addressable market size is basically the entire U.S. population between 18 and 64. That's 189.6 million people. And its core market is pretty large. It's 123 million people. So certainly it is a mainstream product, but the consumer is making an association between kombucha and sparkling water. So now the key question is, how do the motivations and the factors like attitudes and fears, how do they differ for sparkling water when you compare it to kombucha? And is there something we can learn from sparkling water? So what I'm going to do in order to look at that is basically hit the compare button here on the right side. And what MotivBase does is it compares the two topics. Obviously, no surprise there, kombucha relatively young compared to sparkling water, much smaller market size. But here's where things get interesting. So the first thing I would look for is, how do the sociodemographics differ? Is there anything significant? The one thing that does stand out to me a little bit is maybe a little bit of over-indexing on single people with sparkling water. Let's see, in terms of education, a little bit more of the educated consumer on sparkling water and less so on the kombucha side. So this also gives us a sense of, where the marketing dollars, for example, or the innovation dollars might need to be focused on. Sparkling water seems to be a little more focused towards men as opposed to pretty even split on the kombucha side. Now, the most important part, though, I think, is when you look at these four factors. Look at the motivations that are exclusive to sparkling water versus kombucha. Sparkling water, prove they're not bored in their lives, protect their upward mobility image, feel in control over their consumption. Very different than some exclusive motivations for kombucha, which is more about control over my body or feel like I'm physically, mentally superior or living life without consequences. And then there are some common motivations as well, but just two: keeping up with changing expectations and feeling more practical and rational. Let's look at fears here. Again, some exclusive fears for sparkling water: being stuck. So sparkling water clearly has this sort of upward mobility status image associated with it, which kombucha seems to lack. So right away, and again, there's much more analysis we can do here, but just for the sake of a quick example, right away what I notice here is that the missing association with kombucha is something that connects a particular brand of kombucha, or maybe the category as a whole, to a beverage that can be consumed in style, potentially paired with foods and different kinds of flavor profiles and things like that. So that's really where you can see an opportunity to bridge the gap and grow the category at large. Again, interestingly enough, no shared values between the two. Some shared attitudes, but a lot of differences in attitudes between the two again. So this completes a quick example of how you can use the compare feature and use the different workspaces in order to basically identify growth opportunities for a category that might currently be quite nascent. Just a quick reminder that you can save these workspaces. All you have to do is hit that floppy button there, and it'll save the workspace, which you can access quite simply by pulling up this sidebar, going into projects, and you'll see a list of all the projects that you've saved.